The Cuban Missile Crisis by Blake Metzger. The crisis begins. The cause of all this was because Cuba wanted aid from the Soviet Union. They wanted the Soviet Union to provide them with nuclear missiles and other supplies so they didn't get picked on by other countries in the future. The Soviet Union agreed to help out Cuba since the U.S. has missile sites in both Turkey and Italy. This is a picture of Cuban leader Fidel Castro and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. The U.S. response. President Kennedy had heard rumors about this happening, but wouldn't believe it until he saw it. He had an Air Force U-2 spy plane fly over Cuba, and it brought back photographic evidence of missile sites there. He then sent a military blockade to prevent more missiles and supplies from entering into Cuba. This is one of the photographs brought back from the plane. It is a picture of a launch site located in San Cristobal, Cuba. This is where President Kennedy set up his military blockade to try and prevent the Soviet Union from providing Cuba with more nuclear weapons and other supplies. The first discussion question. If you were in President Kennedy's shoes, how would you have acted on the situation? The crisis ends. On October 27th, President Kennedy reached out to Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. Kennedy agreed to pull the U.S. missiles out of Turkey and Italy if the Soviet Union would remove their missiles from Cuba. On November 2nd, President Kennedy broadcasted to America that the Soviets were dismantling and removing all missiles from Cuba. This is a picture of President Kennedy with U.S. Army officials in front of Bastille missiles that are stationed in the United States of America. This is a picture of President Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. The second discussion question. If you were an American citizen and knew of the severity of the situation, would you have felt safe? Why or why not? Divergence point. My divergence point is what might have happened if the Soviet Union had kept supplying Cuba with missiles. This is my interpretation of what could have happened next. Short-term effects. If the Soviet Union had not agreed with Kennedy and continued to supply Cuba with nuclear arms, the Washington-Moscow hotline would never have been created. Without this, there would be no direct connection between the Soviet Union and the United States, and could cause further problems as time went on. Within a year, the growing tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union would become too great and war would be inevitable. America would ally with France and England as its partners to start out with. Then, the U.S. would reach out to Germany and Japan to join forces with them. The Soviet Union would have China on their side because of the similar communist beliefs, and Cuba because they aided them from the beginning. Long-term effects. With the war finally beginning, America's first target would be Cuba, since they are the smallest and closest of the countries. France, Britain, and Germany would attempt to hold off the Soviet Union from the western side, while Japan goes after China from the eastern side. As the U.S. is fighting Cuba, the Soviet Union, France, Britain, and Germany would be in a stalemate, so China would send troops over to the Soviet Union and take their focus off Japan. Once America defeats Cuba, the war overseas will have taken a huge toll on all the countries. With Cuba out of the way, America will focus on the battle going on overseas. It will send troops and supplies to both the western and the eastern sides of the fight. However, a short time after America would try and help France, Britain, and Germany, all three countries will be ruins due to nuclear bombs and gas. The Soviet Union will be greatly damaged along with China, so America will end it once and for all. They will send all troops and missiles to Japan and bomb China and the Soviet Union until both fall completely. The third discussion question. Would your outcome of this event be similar to mine? If so, how? This is how I see the Cuban Missile Crisis going if the Soviets had not stopped supplying Cuba with nuclear arms.